everyone, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about timers. Now, this is a kind of a universal concept, doesn't just apply to making games with p5play, but this idea that we might have some timed events inside of our programs, it's something that tends to come up quite often. So we're going to talk about different strategies that we can use to include timed events inside of our programs. And we're going to do that by developing a small p5play example. So just before we dive into it, we're going to quickly go and include the p5play library as we've done in every example so far. I'm going to go into my index page, right? Just include p5play over here. And then go into my sketch and replace create canvas with new canvas. This time we're just going to go with the window size, no pixelated mode for this example. And we're simply going to set a black background. Okay. All right. So for the demo we're going to do, this is going to be a short one. We're going to create a program that's going to generate some circles over time. And then we'll write some code that's going to allow us to click the circle. And then once we click on a circle, it's going to change its color and it's going to trigger a timed event. So it's going to trigger a bit of a delay. And then let's say a couple of seconds later, the circle is going to disappear and explode into lots of little pieces. Okay? So let's start by creating a variable here. Let's call it circles. And this is going to represent a group. Okay, so we're going to put our circles into a group of sprites. And let's define a few attributes for the circles. So we'll make their location random. So we're going to use the arrow setter syntax to randomize the width and height of our circle. And we'll also randomize the diameter. Okay? So let's make this random between, I don't know, 50 and 100. And just to test it out, let's say we wanted to make 5 circles, right? We could go and say amount 5. And there we go. We got 5 circles that are going to be random each time. Okay. Now, let's say we wanted these circles to come in over time. Okay. We've already done this in a previous example. If you'll recall the zombie apocalypse from a few weeks ago, we used a counter variable to get things to happen over time. So let's jump in this program just to recap how we did that really quickly. So the strategy here was to use a variable, right? So I made a variable called new zombie counter. And in draw, we had some, or in run game, rather, we had some code that would increase new zombie counter by 1 every frame. And then if it reached a certain threshold, so here every 60 frames, we introduced a new zombie, we would simply reset the counter back down to 0. So in effect, this just became a number that counts up. When it reaches a threshold, it goes back down to 0, and we can use this strategy to build simple timers inside our code. Okay? These are not really based on actual time, just the number of frames being rendered, but we can approximate actual time using that strategy. And there's nothing wrong with doing things that way. In fact, this can be a perfectly viable way of creating counters inside your programs. Okay? So we could use this approach here to create new circles over time. But just to show you some alternative ways of handling things in JavaScript, we're going to use 2 functions today, one called setInterval and one called setTimeout. Now, an interval in JavaScript is when you set up a function that's going to occur on a kind of a repeating pattern. Okay? So here's what I mean. We're going to make a function here called new circle. So let's make a function called new circle. And the job of that function is going to simply take the amount variable from our group and just increase it by 1, okay, just to add a new circle. And if we were to call new circle right in setup, it would simply just make 1 circle. And what am I missing here? Circles do not have, oh, my bad. Okay, so this variable here is not visible because I redefined it accidentally in setup. Oops, my mistake. So let's fix that. We don't need let here. If we do that, right, circle becomes a local variable to set up and our global variable remains undefined. So now this is creating a new circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the setInterval command. So this is a JavaScript function. and we're going to say call new circle on a set interval. And we're going to provide an amount of time in milliseconds. So if I wanted to get, let's say, one new circle every second in this program, I could say set interval new circle 1000, and every second now we have this interval that's running in the background that's going to trigger the function that we told it to call every 1000 milliseconds. And this is now adding automatically new circles to my sketch, right? So this is getting called on this interval. Okay? Once you create an interval in JavaScript, it's just going to keep running in the background as long as the program is running. So just as an FYI, you can record the ID of an interval inside a variable. What did I write? Interval ID. Let's just call it ID for short. Okay, I don't know why I'm going so long. Just call it ID. So when you set an interval, okay, this interval gets a unique number generated for it. And if we were to record this into a variable, we could turn that off at a later time. Okay, so for example, here I could say on the key pressed, we're going to say clear interval ID, okay, just to demonstrate the idea here. If I wanted to stop circles from getting created, I could hit a key. And now I've deleted this interval by calling clear interval. Okay, so just I pointed out here because once you get an interval going, it's going to just keep running until you tell it to stop. So the way that you can do this, stop an interval from running based on its ID. Okay, so I'll comment this out because we don't really need this in our code, but you would set the interval, record its ID, and then you would clear it whenever you want. Okay, so let's say you wanted to have an interval, but in only a specific portion of your game state, you would have to remember its ID and clear it later on when you, let's say, move to a different game state. So just a good FYI here. All right, so we're going to have this program here that's going to create circles every second here. So let's add a little bit of code and talk about a timeout. Okay, so a timeout is like an interval, except it's a one-time event. So we can set a timeout, and then when we're going to give it a function, a number of time, and then when that time expires, our function will get called by the background JavaScript scheduling system. So here for our timeouts, we're going to say, let's look at when we click on one of these circles. Okay? And that'll also act as a bit of a refresh on how to interact with Sprite objects using their built-in mouse object. Okay? So let's go into draw here, and we're going to write a for loop that's going to iterate over all the circles that we've created. So let's write a for loop here that's going to say, let's use C for short. We'll say for every circle C that we have, okay, we're going to check if the mouse is currently being pressed on these circles. So the way we do this in p5play is very elegant. Every sprite object has its own mouse variable inside of it, and we can ask that mouse variable, is it being pressed, right? So if we say if c.mouse.pressed, this is going to tell us if we are pressing the mouse on one of these objects. Okay? So let's demonstrate that this works. We're going to say if that happens, we're going to set the color of our circle to, let's say, red. Okay, let's go and run the code here. Oops, that should be circles plural. My bad. So now I'm going to have some circles coming in, and if I click them, right, it's going to set their color to red. Cool. Awesome. And then before we do that, we're going to put a little bit of code here that's going to trigger a timeout. So we'll say if the color, let's check, first of all, let's check the color isn't red to begin with. Okay, so we'll say if the color is not equal to red, okay, because we don't want to allow the user to be able to click multiple times and trigger multiple timeouts. Okay. Then we are going to set a timeout function. Now we need to create a function that's going to run on timeout. So let's make it down here, and we're going to call that function explode circle. Okay. Now, one thing we can do also both with intervals and timeouts is we can pass parameters that are going to get transmitted to the callback function when it gets triggered. Here's what I mean. We're going to say set timeout. We're going to call explode circle. Okay. We'll call it, let's say, in 2 seconds or 2000 milliseconds. And we're going to pass a variable to that function when it gets called. We're going to pass the C variable that we just clicked on, right? The C sprite that we just clicked on, so that explode circle knows which variable to delete. Okay? And we're going to add a parameter here called C. We could call it whatever. We're going to call it C, the same, so that when we call the explode circle function, we know which circle we're supposed to delete. Okay? So for instance, we could say C.remove, right? If we just wanted to remove it. So now if I click on a circle, if I wait 2 seconds, they're going to get removed. Okay, so the timeout is calling my explode circle. And unlike the interval, timeout is only just going to run once. Okay, so interval just sets a recurring event that's going to run in the background every second. Timeout just says 2 seconds in the future, run this function and provide this parameter. And we can have any number of parameters if we wanted to. We can have more than one. And we just have to match the number here when we define our function. So here, just for fun, we could say, in addition to removing this circle, why don't we trigger a little explosion on the location of our circle? Okay, we're going to make a new group. Just these are not global; they're just going to exist for the purpose of creating the explosion. So I'm going to define it right there in the callback. Let's make a little group called explosion, and the idea here is let's make the color equal to red. Okay. The X location of the objects from that group, we're going to match the X location of the circle we're just deleting. Okay. And then we'll do a little bit of a randomization. Okay, we're going to say let's randomize the speed of each. We're going to use the arrow setter again. We'll say let's give them a random speed. Let's say between 3 and 4. Let's give a random direction. So they're going to explode in all kinds of different direction. Random 360 degrees. Let's give them a random diameter. Let's go a little bit smaller than the original circles. So we'll go random 1025. And let's randomize the life of these explosion particles. So let's go random 25 to 50. Okay. And then once we've done this, we're going to set the amount, and we can randomize that too. Now notice I'm not using an arrow setter here. This is just going to tell my explosion group how many objects to generate. So let's go anywhere between 10 and 20, okay, when it's time to do our thing. So now when we call explode circle on a circle, I'm going to click it, and 2 seconds later, that circle gets removed, and it's getting replaced here by a group that's going to have the same location at that circle, the same color, and then a random number of elements in the group between 10 and 20 with random directions, random speed, random diameters. So now we can go around, click on these circles, and 2 seconds later, they will explode because we set this timeout function. Okay? So this can be an easy way of manipulating timed events inside your programs, right? Kind of an alternative to creating these timers. So timers are great. You can have timers that count up, timers that count down. By the way, you can also easily add, if you wanted to have a timer on this C object, you could create any attribute, right, on the sprite that you want. So timers are good, but you end up having lots of if statements and code to actually decrease or increase the timers all over the place. So using timeouts at intervals is another alternative where you can have those scheduled, kind of running in the background, and have those function calls happen when you decide to. Okay? We could even randomize the delay here, for example, right? It doesn't have to be set 2 seconds. We could put a random number over here. Yeah, so not too much to it here. This is one useful way to think about adding timed events inside your code. So maybe you have like a power up that disappears after a certain amount of time, or something that happens after a certain amount of time, you can use timeouts, or you can use interval if you're going to have a recurring, repetitive event that is constant. Okay? All right. So hopefully that was useful, and take care.